My interest was in building buildings, not becoming an architect, not becoming a contractor, but building buildings. And the different experiences that I've had, the different jobs I've had, the different ways that I've filled in the gaps in my experience, education, what roles, whatever it is, has always been in the service of being able to build the best buildings that I can efficiently and actually get them built, not just draw them, but really get them built. And what I discovered in my architecture education is that that's definitely not the case for everybody who is in that educational field. And that's perfectly fine because there's people who do research, there's theorists, there's historians, there's all sorts of stuff. But for me, I'm here to build buildings. And so today I'm going to talk a little bit about what that has looked like for me over the last 25 years. So, coming out of high school, late 90s, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had no idea. I didn't even know an architect. I really didn't. But I applied to the University of Colorado in Boulder because I liked climbing, I liked skiing. They had an architecture program. I liked drawing. And without exaggeration, that's about as far as I got in terms of the thinking process. I always figured, I could do something else if I needed to. But getting out of Rhode Island, getting to Colorado, this sort of mythical place for, a 16-year-old Chris applying to college, that was really the thought process there. And then drawing was really, I like drawing. I'm not good at traditional school. Maybe I should focus on the drawing side. And, certainly here we are 25, almost more years later. I'm happy that that's the way it went. In college, at the end of college, I started designing climbing walls for a company that designed and installed climbing walls. I did that during college and after college for about 3 years. So that was about 4 years total. And as I got to the end of that time, I ended up going to the Harvard GSD. And I'm sort of blocking these out relative to each other, sort of. So this was another fairly straightforward path in terms of, 4 years in college, about 4 years overlapping designing climbing walls, and about 4 years in graduate school. And that's all about, not unexpected. But the one thing I will say is that at my job in El Dorado, at El Dorado Wall Company, the biggest thing that I was opened to is the idea of design build. And so from my very first job that wasn't in a restaurant, basically, I was exposed to design build. I learned how to weld. I learned how to do all these different things. I learned how to work with the welders and the engineer and the installers to build a better product by making sure that this relationship was significant and was taken care of in a very meaningful way. At the same time, I also was doing my first sort of commission projects. So before graduate school, I was doing, some sort of small, did a house, did an office, did, a bunch of small stuff, a bunch of furniture, all sorts of things like that. A lot of which I was involved with the construction of as well. And so, again, going back to construction from the very beginning has been an important part of my understanding of how we put buildings together and, yeah, what's necessary to do that well. As I got through graduate school, you have these breaks, whether it's winter break or summer break, and, it adds up to being quite a few opportunities. And I'll just say I worked at about, call it like 5 different offices over that time. It was a great way to, ask questions, see how people are running their offices. Those are good experiences and opportunities to work at, in my case, it was sort of more boutique things. Although I will have to say that, some of these actually did involve more construction. But for the most part, my time in graduate school, my time at CU, and a lot of the jobs I had were not necessarily about construction. They were really about, these sort of boutiques, boutique architecture, that kind of thing, and sort of how that world works. And my first job out of grad school was also that. So I spent 1 year doing pretty high end architecture, working on law school building, very nice building, great people, good project. But I worked at it for pretty much a year and jumped ship to work at a design build company. At the time, it was Blue Homes. and we had a factory. Again, not, you know, so now we're going back about, 10 years, going back to a point where I remember, man, I really liked working with the fabricators. I really liked working with these folks who, really knew what they were doing. And then I was able to offer a different point of view. I was able to offer solutions to their problems, and it's a relationship, it's a conversation, it's a lot of different questions. One of the things that I started doing when I was in graduate school was teaching. And it was first as a TA in graduate school. And then as I got to Blue Homes and I started doing a little bit more of not just one job, but a couple different jobs, it was teaching at a university and a grad level. So teaching studios, a lot of teaching professional practice, a lot of teaching construction materials, different things like that. And so that started becoming a thing when I was at the GSD. And after I started working, it also was something that I was doing in graduate school while I was working and doing different things. So it started becoming something that I thought of as a way to be talking about communicating well and managing projects, managing classes, that kind of thing. And over the years, I've spent quite a bit of time teaching. I've spent over a decade, doing this, teaching. And it was great. I really enjoyed it. I really love teaching. There's reasons why I've gotten out of it now. In fact, what I'm doing online, I look at as teaching. So it was a great experience for me. One of the things that happened was as I was at Blue Homes, I started talking with folks who were doing climbing gyms. They had had a climbing gym in New York City, BKB, and there was this overlap, this sort of imagining of what a new climbing gym could be. Like, what would that look like? And that turned into BKB Somerville, which is now under a different management. But that was not just about design. That was about also managing construction. It was also about managing the project team. So very quickly, I was back to managing, a lot more than just design. So it was like design, design plus. We could call it design build. You could really call it sort of whatever. And honestly, that's really what I continue to do in my practice now. So, owner's rep, dealing with all that kind of stuff. As I'm dealing with that, there's also this idea of ops integration where, in order to be able to do anything well, to run the business, you need to understand enough about operations. In addition, as this all started happening, we started going to more conferences. So, ICSC, many, many times, talking with real estate people, talking with finance people, starting to sort of fill in these gaps, starting to deal with cities as we were doing different projects. Very quickly, I was working in New York, Chicago, Boston, plus, plus, plus. A lot of the major cities that have 2 to 3 sports teams, basically. And all these different cities are not equal, like at all. And so very quickly, we are talking about adding skills to be able to figure out how to negotiate with the city, how to negotiate contracts from a legal perspective. When times got difficult, how to do things that were very important, meaning, firing contractors, dealing with liens, dealing with like whatever it is, all this legal stuff, whether it's zoning or like more sort of critical issues, doesn't really matter. But the point is that there's a lot of this going on, and learning about it, intentionally learning. That's sort of the whole point of this whole thing, is that this isn't an accident. A lot of these different, gaps, especially these ones over here, over here, this is not stuff that every architect is involved with. But for me to make a building, this is what building is understanding enough about all of these things so that you can come up with a strategy to use them all together, to keep it together, to make the project work well. As we kept going, we did a lot of work with developers, learning about them, learning how they work. We did a lot of testing, so test fits, all sorts of stuff, really just understanding how we can work together, how we can, work earlier in processes together on the finance side, knowing enough about that. Eventually, when I got to a point of being an executive there, running that and dealing with all of that and, the sort of management and KPIs and whatever other initials you want to reference. And, it just sort of keeps going, as we got going further, more hiring, different teams. In our case, there were more hiring of individual roles. So even within our own team. So all of a sudden, as you become an executive, it's a lot more about managing and hiring, less drawing, although that's a different conversation in itself, about sort of, people doing what they should be doing. But in reality, what I noticed as I look at something like this is that there's this sort of like, yes, I'm more experienced in certain things. I'm much more experienced in the design and architecture side, and the construction side of sort of underrepresented here, because at this point, pretty much everything that I do, I'm involved with the construction side of it from the very beginning. And, this is just adding different ways of looking at things. So, understanding ideas related to, budgeting and scheduling and all these different things that are required in order to make a building project go off with as few hitches as possible, as close to on budget and on schedule as we can, with the best result possible. And so, absolutely, there are different things that I'm weaker in, and filling in the gaps. So the finance side of things has never been my strong suit, although I can have those conversations. The legal side, I've been able to fill in quite a bit. And then operations, there's definitely like a gap in operations, but I'm not the operator. I just need to know enough about it so that I can talk to people about it, so that when somebody at a city is asking me why this is important to us, I can explain that our operations team, this is a critical thing for them, or whatever the case is. Because what I can tell you is that it's not just about hiring an architect and going, because look at all the stuff that is before. A lot of the decisions are really being made here, even here, where this is where you're making decisions. You're deciding, if you can't make the money work, then you don't have a project. If you don't have a site for the project, then you don't have a project. So way before any of this happens, and this is why a lot of this work is done in-house. And this is really what I'm getting at, which is that as an architect, you don't really live here. In my case, in order to build a building, which again is my goal personally, not being an architect, that's just one of the tools in my toolbox as someone who builds buildings. That's why I refer to myself as a building producer or a building and development consultant, because my interest is in the whole process, knowing enough about all of it to leverage all of it to get the best result for my clients. So in reality, as an architect, I'm still starting over here. Often there aren't many architects involved in these conversations about finance and real estate, but so much of what's happening is actually happening like way back here. Because if none of this works, again, you're not going to be able to move forward. And so what really happens is you start getting ideas. And then, yes, you maybe jump forward to do some test fits, things like that. But then you also have to jump ahead and ask questions about pricing. And then you probably also need to ask your operations people, does this even work? And then there's this whole other, backtrack. Okay, well, now that we've talked, our team thinks it might be a go. Does it work on the real estate side? Does it work on the finance side? Does it work on the legal side? Do we need zoning? Do we need anything crazy? Does the city have any issue that we need to get approvals for or anything like that? Who's going to be on our team? Who's doing all these different roles? And then eventually, as you're going through this, the point is that these are loops that are not just one thing at a time. It's really about, starting somewhere and making your way through, and then sort of doing these loops and these sub loops. And as you get through it, that's why having an awareness of the entire process for me has been so critical. Because if you don't understand enough about these processes, then you aren't going to be able to leverage them and make the best product you can, realizing, when do we need people? When do we need to hire people? Who do we not need to hire in some cases? Whatever the case is, it's really more about being able to, create the best project possible as efficiently as possible. And to me, that's making a building. It's not about being an architect for me. It's not about being a contractor. I'm both of those things. Those are tools. I used to think that and try to be careful of not being spread too thin horizontally. And the way that I do that is I'm just really careful with what it is that I actually do for people. Because this strategy that we're talking about, that is something that we can talk about very quickly. And that's why I look at it this way, because by being able to connect these sort of columns horizontally in that drawing we were talking about, that is what gives me the ability to talk to you, the building owner or the project owner, about all of it. And yes, we are going to need attorneys. You should have a finance person. You will need architects at your local, in your area for, being the architect of record and helping us out. These people will become critical parts of the entire process. Absolutely. We are not talking about understaffing our own team. We are talking about just not bringing everybody in until they need to be brought in. They're doing other things. Why would we start running these tabs when there's almost nothing for them to do? Asking questions, doing exploratory work, absolutely. Doing pre-construction, 100%. But, the point is that there's this horizontal connectivity, which is what I've strived to connect in my career, through my experiences, through my work, through the things that I've very intentionally gotten involved with. Because that's when I look at people who are the best in their industries, that's how they do it. They're not just, they can sometimes be focused on one thing, but so many people are able to synthesize information. And that's why I focus on this, because to me, it's all about synthesizing the information to get the best result possible. If that's interesting for you, please like and subscribe. That's the best way for me to see that people are watching. And I appreciate your time. And I'll see you in the next video.